Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard flew into Queenstown on the weekend for meetings with Prime Minister John Key. A major initiative announced was that New Zealand will take 150 boat people a year who've been approved as refugees by Australian authorities. Professor of International Relations Robert Patman joins us to discuss the significance of the initiative and the meeting generally. Good evening, Professor Patman.
Good evening, Rebecca.
Now, the issue of what are described as boat people has coloured Australian politics for many years. What can you tell us about it?
Well, it's a controversial issue in Australian politics because the Howard government set up a system of intercepting people smugglers from countries like Malaysia and Indonesia, and they intercepted them and then placed these people who were seeking asylum in offshore countries such as Papua New Guinea and Nauru. And they were put in sort of detention centres there, and the international controversy, indeed criticism within Australia, is that these conditions don't match the sort of standards that Australia stands for internationally. Now, so there has been that issue of the Australian, and there's no shortage of people continuing trying to get into Australia from Malaysia and Australia. Now, critics point out what New Zealand and Australia should be doing is actually beefing up the process of administering claims directly from these countries, which will cut off the flow of boat people, but that's probably quite an expensive option.
And John Key has agreed to take 150 of these boat people. What kind of ramifications can we expect?
Well, I think we have to be careful about this. John Key is not adding to our list of, we take 750 refugees each year, subject to them fulfilling, our requirements for citizenship here, people seeking asylum. He's actually, if you like, subtracting 150 of those 750 from the total and saying they can come. From people deemed appropriate for political asylum by the Australians. So we're willing to help the Australians out. So it's clearly a gesture, I think, to take a bit of pressure off the Australian government, an Australian government which is facing re-election.
Do you think Mr Key is perhaps trying to gain something from providing this assistance?
I think he's certainly trying to win some brownie points. He's trying to keep the relationship sweet. As Mr Key pointed out quite candidly, Australia is very important to New Zealand. It's the greatest source of external investment in this country. It provides the biggest number of tourists to this country, and it's New Zealand's #1 export destination. So there's lots of reasons why New Zealand probably needs Australia more than Australia needs New Zealand. That's the perception, I think, from Wellington.
What other major initiatives came out of this meeting?
There were a number. It's often forgotten because of the controversy over the boat people agreement that we're coming up to 30 years of closer economic arrangements between the two countries, or closer economic relations as it was called, CR. And there's been agreement between Mr Key and Julia Gillard to harmonise the mobile telephone roaming rate, which is widely regarded as exorbitant. So there's a joint crackdown promised. There's also a pledge to harmonise investment arrangements between the two countries so businesses can enjoy a level playing field when investing in each other. There's also an attempt to ease travel between the two countries, the wider application of the Smart Gate facility so that Australians can get to New Zealand quicker and vice versa, our citizens can get to Australia quicker. But, and here's the big but, Ms Gillard didn't respond to John Key's requests, if he made them, to improve the conditions of Kiwis living in Australia. At the moment, the Kiwis do not enjoy the same rights as Australian citizens, particularly in education and welfare. But I think John Key's mindful that Julia Gillard is not likely to move on that during an election year.
How important are these face-to-face meetings? Surely a lot of this work is done by bureaucrats on both sides.
I think the chemistry between the leaders, particularly two countries who are probably, they're our closest neighbour, let's face it. I think the chemistry is important. And often it defies politics. Helen Clark got on very well with John Howard, although disagreed on a whole range of things. And John Key genuinely seems to have a warm relationship with Julia Gillard. Julia Gillard has often referred to New Zealand as family. And John Key, I think, has also made very warm references to her leadership. So I think it is an important relationship. And I don't think, I think the potential for irritation, which occurred during the Hawke years, when David Lange and Bob Hawke didn't see eye to eye, was seen as having negative ramifications for both countries. I think both countries believe they have a vested interest in trying to make the relationship work.
Professor of International Relations Robert Patman, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.